You're about to see a flight attendant slap a billionaire's 9-year-old son. Then one call freezes $275 million. Ever seen that happen at 30,000 feet? The moment the cabin door closes on Skywave Flight 501, a sharp crack slices through the low hum of jet engines. Thwap! A hand connects with a child's cheek so hard it seems to echo off every leather seat. In seat 2A, Chris Caldwell flinches, pressing his palm to his reddened cheek. His EcoFly VR headset wobbles as he turns toward his father, eyes glistening with shock and tears. A droplet of apple juice flies from his cup, splattering onto the plush cream leather seat beside him. Standing immediately behind Chris, Ben Caldwell remains frozen for a heartbeat, absorbing what just happened. His crisp linen shirt and tailored chinos do little to soften the tension coiled in his shoulders. In his hand, his thumb hovers over his phone screen, lingering on a contact labeled Omega Call. He offers Chris a steadying smile, even though his own jaw is clenched with barely contained fury. Chris's shoulders tremble as he fights back tears. The cabin has fallen into a stunned hush. Champagne glasses stop jingling. A chatter of whispered gasps drifts through the rows of first-class passengers. Heads swivel. Phones come up to record the scene. "Dad, that hurt," Chris whispers, voice shaky. Ben crouches down, tucking one arm around his son's shoulders while slipping his phone back into his pocket. "It's okay, buddy," he says in a voice that's calm but fierce. "You're safe. Let's move." At the top of the aisle, Laura Simmons stands frozen, her hand still outstretched. She's the chief purser, known for her icy professionalism. Her uniform is immaculate, her hair pulled back in a precise chignon, but her face betrays a flicker of regret. Or maybe it's defiance. Ben shoots Laura a single steady look before turning away. He helps Chris to his feet, draping a protective arm over his son as they step toward the aisle. Less than 10 seconds have passed since thwap. Already, Ben's thought process is in overdrive. He had anticipated friction. He knew Laura resented wealthy first-class passengers, but he never expected open violence. He must act fast. Across the aisle, a co-attendant named Mark glances uneasy, watching Laura's rigid posture. He exchanges a look with her, silently acknowledging that protocol has just gone out the window. In the cockpit, the captain's voice crackles over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've just received an instruction from Skywave headquarters. Flight 501 will make an unscheduled landing at Orlando International Airport due to an operational matter. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We apologize for the inconvenience." In a small office just off the flight deck, Diane Morales, Skywave's vice president of flight operations, stares at her tablet, eyes wide. The secure message reads, "Laura Simmons has struck Chris Caldwell, son of Ben Caldwell. Suspend Flight 501's first-class cabin crew immediately. Freeze $275 million in credit lines." She blinks, then taps, "Confirm." Back in first class, the cabin's ambient lighting shifts from warm amber to a harsher blue-white, an automatic signal that the plane's network has executed an emergency override. Overhead screens flicker to life, displaying a grainy, live feed, "Incident in Progress," in the corner, labeled C. Caldwell Evidence. Passengers scramble for their phones. A middle-aged financier grabs his device and starts streaming. "I can't believe this! Watch this billionaire's son just get slapped out of nowhere!" Mark, the co-attendant, hovers nearby, straddling the tension. Laura stands motionless, realization dawning that her impulsive act has triggered a chain reaction with consequences she never imagined. Ben guides Chris down the aisle, moving methodically toward the exit. A handful of passengers shuffle aside to let them pass. Margaret Hill, a retired librarian seated up front, steps forward and catches Ben's eye. She holds her smartphone at waist level, ready to record. "Thank you for standing up for your son," she says gently. "No child should ever be treated like that, especially not in first class." Ben nods, offering a tight, grateful smile. He doesn't respond verbally. Words would only slow him down. They reach the jet bridge as Orlando ground crew positions the plane at a remote gate. The door slides open. Flashbulbs pop from a cluster of reporters crowded just beyond the walkway. A reporter steps forward with a handheld microphone. "Mr. Caldwell, why did you pull that call? What exactly are you going to do?" Ben takes a steadying breath, crouching so he meets Chris's eye. "Actions have consequences," he says quietly. "That's all." Chris clings to his father's hand, staggering a bit as they step onto the terminal floor. He glances up, eyes brimming with tears and curiosity. "Dad, what happens now?" Ben straightens, gently tightening his grip on Chris's hand. He offers his son a reassuring nod. "We'll head to the car. I'll explain everything once we're safe. Angel of Providence, the ground crew, guide them past rows of gleaming taxis and news cameras. The captain and Diane have already begun damage control, but word travels fast. Skywave's first-class crew has been suspended, and $275 million in credit lines are frozen. Passengers murmur. A handful applaud quietly. Some even rise to their feet in support of the child and his father. Harry, a local news photographer, walks beside Margaret Hill. "You think they'll fire everyone?" he whispers to her, camera lens trained on Ben and Chris. Margaret shakes her head, lip trembling. "It's bigger than that. I think they just destroyed the whole first-class brand." Ben pauses for a moment at the terminal entrance, letting the roar of Orlando traffic wash over him. He looks down at Chris and ruffles his son's hair. "Ready, bud?" Chris nods silently, voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, Dad." They step outside into the mid-afternoon sun. The sliding glass doors swing shut behind them, leaving behind a stunned terminal and a flight crew that will be scrambling for answers. In 5 minutes, Ben Caldwell's single call has triggered a meltdown. An entire first-class crew suspended, aviation credit lines frozen, and a cascade of headlines exploding across the airwaves. Chris gazes up at his father, still gripping that small hand so tightly. Ben offers a final squeeze, eyes cool but compassionate. "This is only the beginning. Hang on tight." And with that, they walk toward the waiting black sedan, ready to ride into the storm of publicity and power that Ben's one phone call has unleashed. Ben Caldwell's high-rise office in Midtown Manhattan looked like any other executive suite. Sleek glass walls, minimalistic desks, and a panoramic view of the city's steel and concrete sprawl. Yet behind that glass facade, he was orchestrating something far from ordinary. Less than a week before Flight 501's drama unfolded, Ben sat in a conference room with his core leadership team, laptops open, coffee cups half emptied. He leaned forward, voice calm yet urgent. "We need to keep the Caldwell edge. Our tech must outpace any competitor." Around him, 4 executives nodded. Their mutual secret. Chris's EcoFly VR headset wasn't just a toy. It was a direct link into Skywave's cabin AI. "Remember," Ben continued, "we're not just in the energy game anymore. Our software now directly monitors consumer behavior, how they react to perks, how they spend, even how they breathe in these cabins. And Skywave thinks they control that data." His CTO, Amara Okafor, tapped away on her laptop. "Ben, we've tested the VR firmware in closed beta. When Chris's heartbeat spikes, the headset activates 360-degree recording. It streams encrypted to our server, completely undetectable. We've lab tested it against every firewall Skywave uses." Ben gave a slow nod. "Good. It's time to put that to use. Chris will be our onboard eyes and ears, and he won't know all the details, just enough to stay safe." He glanced at his son's vacant seat at the head of the table, the lunchbox still untouched. Down the hall, in a corner, a mock-up of an airplane cabin, Chris sat cross-legged on a plush seat, enthralled with his VR headset. He was eager to impress his dad. At 9 years old, he'd inherited his father's tech fascination, and apparently his cool nerves. Ben had dropped him off at the Skywave R&D lab that morning, insisting Chris keep his role strictly confidential. For Chris, this was the ultimate field trip. He'd be the first kid ever chosen to test a new generation of smart cabin technology. "See this?" said a Skywave engineer named Martin, a rail-thin guy with a bushy beard and thick glasses. He tapped at a tablet screen. "Our AI cabin system predicts passenger needs, lights, temperature, even meal preference. We've been collecting data to personalize the flight experience, all to upsell first-class packages." Chris nodded enthusiastically. No idea what upsell meant. He fiddled with his VR headset until the screen displayed the cabin interior. Overhead bins, leather seats, soft lighting, everything digitally rendered. A soft voice from the VR explained, "The AI can track stress levels, micro-expressions, and gauge when a passenger is unhappy. If it detects dissatisfaction, the attendant is alerted." Ben watched from the observation window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. That midday, he had drilled Chris. "Just pretend you're on vacation, okay? Act like you normally would. But if you feel anything weird, like someone's watching you, you let me know." In the mock cabin, Chris blinked. "Dad, they're making the overhead light dim a little for me. That's kinda cool." He adjusted the VR, and the scene shifted. A digital overlay of a family napping, a couple sipping wine. A soft indicator in the corner signaled monitoring active. Martin smiled. "That's exactly it. Once we launch this system, it'll virtually guarantee no one's unhappy in first class. We'll see if that market share climbs another 3%. We call it Project Zeppelin." He turned to Ben, offering a professional nod. "Thanks for letting us test on Chris. We'll anonymize the data, no identifying info. He's just Test Subject Beta 9 in our logs." Ben didn't flinch. "Understood," he said. But in his head, he was thinking 3 steps ahead. "I'll anonymize your entire AI system as soon as it goes live." He watched Chris from behind the glass. His son clicked a virtual button on the screen, and a prompt flashed. "Recording, passive mode." Chris didn't know he was transmitting everything, including the conversation about upselling and prioritizing premium passengers. Later that afternoon, Ben dropped Chris back off at home, a high-rise condo several blocks away. Chris bounded out of the car, VR headset clutched in one hand and a chocolate milkshake in the other. "Dad, they might give me a real uniform next time. Can you believe it? I felt like a pilot." Ben ruffled his hair. "You did great, buddy. Remember, this is just a game for us. It's important that nobody sees how we're using that headset." Chris grinned, swallowing the last of his shake. At home, their living room was full of tech gadgets and prototype hardware. Ben's desk had 3 glowing monitors, stock tickers, server logs, and a live feed labeled Caldwell Secure. He gestured for Chris to drop the headset on a charging dock. "That was cool," Chris said, plopping onto the couch. "But I don't get why they're so obsessed with first class. Economy's fun too, right?" Ben leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Look, pal, some people pay extra because they want to feel special. Quieter ride, bigger screen. But if you give everyone in economy an equally fun experience, they might ditch first class. That's worth billions to some airlines." He paused, giving Chris a steady look. "And right now, we're just seeing how that system talks to them. We'll find out if they treat some people better than others." Chris's eyes lit up as he tilted his head. "Like they might ignore the little kid and only help someone sitting in 1A? "Exactly," Ben said. "We want to see if that really happens. For now, you pretend it's just a fun experiment. Okay?" Chris nodded solemnly, already used to his dad's conspiratorial secrets. He hopped off the couch to peek at the server monitor. "Did we get anything cool today?" Ben sipped a glass of water, glancing at the screens. "We caught some interesting lines, like a chat between the engineer and the exec saying, 'If we see someone's not paying extra, nudge them out of the best seats.' I want to check it again tonight." He pulled out his phone, tapped a secure app, and a small green light blinked. "We'll decrypt everything after dinner. That way, nobody can claim we tampered the files." Chris grinned. "Awesome. Maybe tomorrow they'll call me VIP guest so I can get free snacks." Ben ruffled his son's hair, a genuine smile flickering across his face. "We'll see about that," he said. As dusk settled over the skyline, Ben moved to the desk and typed commands. On one screen, lines of code scrolled as encrypted data from Skywave's cabin AI downloaded to Caldwell's secure vault. On another, a folder labeled AI Cabin Logs, Flight 501, popped open. He hit Decrypt and watched clusters of transcripts appear. Taverns of conversation, nudges to upgrade, subtle patterns showing passenger profiling. Hidden within those logs, lines where attendants discussed handling passengers based on their premium status. Now, with that live feed from Chris's VR, Ben had audio and video evidence. He leaned back, eyes steady. Everything was aligning for the day Flight 501 would make its unexpected stop in Orlando. For Chris, it would all still be play. But for Ben Caldwell, this was far more than a game. It was the opening gambit in a chess match with one of the world's biggest airlines, one that he intended to checkmate with the resources of data, secrecy, and a 9-year-old's innocent perspective. In the now dark living room, the city lights glittered below. Chris scampered off to his room to finish a video game. Ben stayed behind, watching lines of code transform into compelling evidence. He thought of tomorrow's flight, of what might happen when a 9-year-old got slapped and his father held the strings. He straightened his shoulders and whispered to himself, "Everything's in place. Just drive." Tonight, he'd sleep lightly. By morning, it would all be in motion. Chris Caldwell settled into his seat as Flight 501 climbed through a patch of thinning clouds. The cabin lights dimmed from amber to a cooler white, casting subtle shadows across the leather seats. Outside, the world beneath them receded into a carpet of cottony clouds. Chris tightened the straps of his EcoFly VR headset, feeling a familiar thrill of anticipation. Overhead, a small indicator blinked green. Recording mode activated. From his seat, Chris could see his father, Ben Caldwell, perched quietly a row behind him. Ben's gaze flickered between Chris and the cabin ahead, eyes unblinking as if he were scanning every detail. He'd explained earlier that morning how the VR headset would capture everything, 360-degree video, high-fidelity audio, whenever Chris's heart rate hit a certain threshold. Today, that threshold sat poised like a switch. If Chris got nervous, the device would begin streaming the cabin's hidden conversations straight to Ben's secure servers. To Chris, it felt like a game. To Ben, it was strategic reconnaissance. A few rows forward, Laura Simmons, Skywave's chief purser, moved through the aisle with the practiced grace of someone used to command. She wore a crisp uniform, hair pulled into a tight chignon, and an expression that suggested she held the entire flight in her iron grip. Next to her, TJ, one of the senior flight attendants, balanced a service tray loaded with sparkling water. His eyes flicked nervously toward Chris, then back to Laura. Chris's heart rate ticked upward as he sensed tension rippling through the cabin. He tried to focus on the virtual blueprint of the A320 in his VR display, but the real world crept into his vision. Laura advancing, TJ watching, the soft rustle of first-class menus being handed out. He felt his pulse quicken as the indicator light on his headset clicked amber. Recording had begun automatically. "Everything looking good back here?" TJ asked, his voice low enough that only Laura could hear. He darted a glance toward Chris's seat. "Yeah," Laura replied tersely, eyes narrowing. "That Caldwell kid thinks he can just play with his toys up here. No one gets VIP treatment without paying top dollar. Make sure he knows the rules." Chris's stomach cramped. He tried to swallow, but his throat felt tight. Still, he kept the VR pointed toward Laura and TJ, willing the camera to catch every word. Laura leaned closer to TJ, voice hushed. "I don't want any trouble. If that kid acts up, we hit him with the emotional adjustment. You know what I mean?" TJ's lips twitched. "Understood. We minimize his service. If he asks for something, well, we pretend we're out of his options." That was the moment Chris feared. They were planning to use the AI cabin system to deliberately shortchange anyone who wasn't deemed profitable enough. In the back of his mind, he remembered Ben's warning. Watch how they talk about premium passengers. As Laura and TJ whispered, Chris's VR recorded every syllable, every pause. He saw a drop of sweat bead at TJ's temple. He felt his heart race faster, bright red on his wrist monitor, keeping the footage rolling. From across the aisle, Ben sat unmoving, eyes fixed on his phone. A window on his screen displayed a low-resolution feed from Chris's VR. He toggled a few settings, adjusting the encryption protocol as more data streamed in. On another tab, lines of code scrolled, decrypting the AI cabin logs that Skywave uploaded continuously. Ben absorbed it all in silence, mouth set in a thin line. Laura straightened and strode past the first-class galley, her heels clicking decisively. She didn't look back, but Chris's VR kept tracking. He shifted slightly, resting one hand on his VR controller to keep the lens pointed at the cabin crew's backs. The subtle hum of the AI's ambient microphone mingled with muted overhead announcements as the flight attendants continued their rounds. Silver trays clinking, soft. "Can I get you anything else?" Exchanges. The gentle hiss of air vents. Ben's screen briefly popped up a text. "Priority encoding active. Live decrypt in T-30 minutes." He didn't blink. From Chris's perspective, the cabin seemed normal, but beneath that gloss was the machinery of discrimination. The AI had already flagged Chris as premium failure because he'd only bought a single first-class seat for travel points, not cash. Now, Laura's decision to tacitly ignore his meal request was a live demonstration of exactly what Ben had warned. Down the aisle, a well-dressed gentleman paid in cash for a glass of champagne. The AI's sensor had flagged him as high value. Now his tray arrived first, topped with fresh strawberries. Chris craned his neck to watch as the system delivered preferential treatment. Noise-canceling headphones, extra pillows, first draft of the in-flight meal. When that tray passed by Chris's seat, he realized he wouldn't be getting his own requested chicken wrap. Not because they ran out. It was because the AI had marked him as non-cash passenger. Chris suppressed a flinch. Instead, he leaned forward and quietly called out to the flight attendant rounding the corner. "Excuse me, I asked for the chicken wrap." The attendant offered an apologetic shrug and whispered, "We're all out of that option." Then she moved on. Laura framed the moment perfectly. She caught Chris's eye and arched an eyebrow. Chris felt a wave of embarrassment. Behind his mask, he clenched his teeth. The recording never skipped a beat. Ben's phone buzzed. He glanced up, meeting his son's eyes for a split second, then tapped a reply. "Keep recording. We're almost there." Chris took a steadying breath, letting his heart rate fall just enough to avoid overheating the VR sensor. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief when the light went back to green. He wheeled his seat around as the flight attendant passed the glass of cold water across his tray table. He gripped it tightly, tasting his own resolve in the icy droplets. Moments later, Laura approached again to offer dessert, an indulgent slice of chocolate cake. She set it in front of a white collar across the aisle, and the rich aroma filled that side of the cabin. Chris watched as the attendant lifted the plated cake toward him, then paused, giving Laura a quick glance. Laura's lips curved into a tiny, satisfied smile before the attendant moved on without dropping the cake. Chris could almost hear the logic. He won't ask again. Chris closed his eyes, anger and determination replacing any sense of embarrassment. He slipped his headphones on, engaged the VR override button, and tapped a note into the on-screen journal. "Laura just denied me dessert. She thinks I'm not worth it." Another data point logged, timestamp, location, cabin altitude. From Ben's vantage point, the live feed grabbed that moment. He paused the real-time decrypt and zoomed in on Laura's expression. The code on his screen highlighted patterns. Staff complicit in AI shortcuts. Active discrimination. He swiped a finger across the decrypted text, sending annotated screenshots to his legal counsel. In the back of the cabin, Laura's sisters addressed the second-class aisle, oblivious to the fact that her conversation had been fully documented by the Caldwell, both VR and in-flight logs. She gave TJ a final nod before the intercom crackled with the captain's voice. "In 15 minutes, we'll begin our descent into Orlando. Thank you for your patience." The AI cabin system automatically adjusted the cabin temperature to a warmer setting for premium passengers, dimming lights slightly for everyone else. Chris let his VR capture it all. Climate control bias, preferential lighting, the clipped tone in Laura's voice when she passed his seat. As the engine roared steadily, Ben sat back in his seat, phone cradled in one hand. He tapped out a quick message. "We have everything. Stand by." And in the hush that followed, he allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. The experiment had yielded exactly what he'd suspected. A first-class system that favored cash over child. Chris removed the VR headset and closed his eyes. He felt the cabin tilt ever so slightly as the plane began its descent. His father's hand landed lightly on his shoulder. "Ready for dinner when we land?" Ben asked quietly. Chris met his father's gaze and smiled, tears still glinting in his eyes. "Ready." They both knew that dinner, when it came, would taste sweeter than any chocolate cake Skywave could serve. The moment Laura Simmons's hand snapped across Chris Caldwell's cheek, the entire cabin froze. That single crack echoed over the hum of the engines, silencing the murmur of first-class passengers lingering in their seats. Chris, 9 years old and still wearing his EcoFly VR headset, recoiled, palm pressed against his reddened cheek. His eyes, wide with shock, flicked up to his father's face, searching for help. Ben Caldwell, 57, sat one row back in seat 1C, watching in stunned slow motion. He wore a pale blue linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and navy chinos, casual enough for travel, but today his posture was anything but relaxed. His jaw clenched the moment the slap landed. The VR indicator on Chris's shoulder flicked from green to red. Auto record mode engaged. Chris touched his cheek, tears brimming, and leaned toward the aisle. Ben dropped his glass of water, letting it tumble onto the carpeted floor. He rose to his feet, face a mask of controlled fury. For a moment, no one dared move. Champagne glasses froze mid-sip. A server's tray tilted in mid-air. Every passenger in the cabin felt the tension spike, a collective intake of breath. Laura Simmons, Skywave's chief purser, stood halfway down the aisle, uniform immaculate, hair in a rigid chignon. Her lips curled into a triumphant half-smile as she watched Chris flinch. In the moments before, she'd murmured to her co-attendant, "Teach that rich kid some respect. No one's special up here unless they pay in cash." Now she stood there, hands still raised. Laura's voice was low but carried easily to the surrounding rows. "He should know the rules. First class isn't for punks." TJ, a senior flight attendant, hovered beside her, eyes flicking nervously between Chris and Ben. He swallowed hard, glancing at the rows of startled passengers. Ma'am, it's okay," he whispered. "We can handle this." But Laura shook her head, stepping back only when the captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the tense voice through the overhead speakers. "We've received instructions from Skywave headquarters to divert to Orlando International Airport for an operational matter. We'll be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. Thank you for your patience." The cabin's ambient glow shifted abruptly. Lights flicked from soft amber to a cooler, harsh white. Screens above each seat blinked on, displaying a message. Flight 501 First Class Cabin suspended pending investigation, along with a smaller ticker that read 275 MO's credit freeze activated. Ben felt the world tilt under his feet as every passenger gasped. He took a step forward, guiding Chris up out of his seat. "Come on," he said quietly, voice steady but firm. "We're heading to Orlando." Chris nodded numbly, rubbing his cheek. "Dad, it really hurt." He looked around at the frozen expressions, some shocked, some alertly filming on their phones. Ben bent down and kissed Chris's forehead. "I know, buddy. Just hold tight. It's going to be okay." He slid his arm around Chris's shoulders, shielding him from prying eyes, then led him toward the back of the cabin. Laura's crew, and now the entire first-class team, scrambled for their phones. Inside the galley, TJ's hands shook as he tapped out panic-stricken texts. "Crew 501 suspended. Headquarters calls diverts. Credit lines frozen." Other attendants by the galleys stared at their own terminals, their color draining as corporate commands spilled onto the screens. No one met Laura's eye as they each realized the consequences of that one slap. The overhead bins lurched as the plane made a slight adjustment for its descent. A hush fell over every row. Passengers craned to watch Ben and Chris slip past the last seat. Ben guided Chris through the cabin, past rows of whispering travelers whose phones were already streaming live footage. "Billionaire's kid slapped on flight. Entire crew suspended." Comments scrolled on jerky live streams. "That's insane. I can't believe a kid got hit. Press 1 if you think he should sue." The internet had already erupted. At the aircraft door, ground crew in bright vests pointed to a side staircase. A cluster of security officers waited there, ordered to escort just the first-class cabin crew off the plane. Ben guided Chris down the steps, camera flashes popping from reporters who'd caught wind of the diversion. Moments later, Laura Simmons was stepped off by an agent who gripped her elbow firmly. She looked back, mouth open in outrage. "This is... Ben Caldwell is abusing his power. You have no proof." Before she could finish, a low murmur rippled through the crowd around the staircase. Ben recognized the elderly woman, Margaret Hill, the retired librarian, standing near the bottom, phone in hand. She caught Ben's gaze and nodded. "We saw it," she said, voice clear. "We got it all." Ben squeezed Chris's shoulder, then turned and walked together down the tarmac to a waiting black sedan. Chris's small hand tightened on Ben's, trying to keep pace with his longer strides. Reporters called out from behind. "Mr. Caldwell, what will you do next? Are you suing Skywave? How does Chris feel?" Ben offered a quick nod, but remained silent until he and Chris slid into the back seat. The door shut, muffling the barrage of questions. Inside the car, the driver's window rolled down. Ben took a steadying breath. "Chris," he began softly, "you did great today. They thought they could humiliate you in front of everyone, but now they're exposed." Chris nodded, voice quivering. "Dad, will they fire all of them?" Ben's gaze focused on the city lights in the distance. "They've already suspended them, and tomorrow, they'll start the investigation that clears our name. But most important, they'll see exactly how the AI was used to discriminate." Chris swallowed hard. "That's why the VR recorded everything?" "Exactly," Ben said. He tapped his phone on the seat, closing the live feed that had already soared to millions of views online. "We have audio of Laura and TJ plotting the whole thing. We even recorded how they used the AI to identify premium passengers. Now the world will see it too." Chris let his VR headset slip into his lap, rubbing his cheek. "I just wanted snacks," he said, trying for a weak grin. Ben chuckled, wiping a tear from Chris's cheek. "I know, bud, I know. But you're more powerful than any snack." As the black sedan pulled away from the terminal, the tarmac lights fading behind them, the two leaned back in their seats. Ben opened his secure app one last time, sending a final stream of decrypted cabin logs to his legal counsel. AI discrimination. Complete transcript attached. Tomorrow, he would file suit. But tonight he would take Chris home, soothe his son's pain, and prepare for a bigger battle, exposing how a single slap and a single phone call could dismantle an entire airline's secret machinery. Outside the car window, Orlando's skyline drifted closer. For Ben and Chris Caldwell, the real journey was just beginning. Flight 501's wheels touched down on the Orlando runway with a muted thump that echoed through the cabin. The hum of the engines shifted to a softer idle as the plane taxied toward a waiting gate. Overhead, the cabin lights brightened slightly, revealing rows of passengers who still wore expressions of stunned disbelief. As the aircraft slowed, a calm announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed in Orlando. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened while ground crew assists us. We apologize for the unexpected diversion." In seat 2A, Chris Caldwell's legs bounced nervously. He clutched his EcoFly VR headset in his lap, the indicator light still blinking green, recording active. He glanced up at his father, Ben, whose calm exterior belied the intensity of the moment. Ben's focus was entirely on his phone, where a small notification read, "Data upload complete. AI cabin logs." The cabin doors opened. A cluster of ground staff and security personnel in bright vests awaited the crew. Flight attendants filed off in a tense, silent procession. Their bright uniforms were dimmed by the reality they faced. Suspended from duty, their reputations dangling by a thread. A few clutched their gear bags. Others stared straight ahead, offering polite but empty nods to the passengers as they passed. Passengers began to stir. Phones and tablets flickered to life, streaming the moment live. "This is live from Orlando. Flight 501's entire first-class crew is standing by the exit. Billionaire's kid slapped. Entire team fired." Some tapped rapidly on their devices, posting on social media, while others leaned forward, trying to catch every detail. Margaret Hill, seated in row 1B, raised her phone to record. At 72, she'd never expected to be front and center of an aviation scandal, but the moment felt like history unfolding. She panned the camera across the aisle, making sure those AI cabin logs notifications were visible on Ben's screen as he reviewed them. Ben gently placed a hand on Chris's back. "We'll be off the plane in just a second. Good job keeping it cool, champ." Chris nodded, though his eyes were wide. "Dad, was that data upload? Did it just—" He swallowed, not finishing the question. "Yeah," Ben replied. "Every word we needed from Laura and TJ is now in our hands." He pocketed his phone just as the chair sign illuminated. "Let's go." They stood, moving into the aisle as the remaining passengers filed past. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others avoided eye contact, unsure what to say. Ben guided Chris past them, heading for the stair that connected to the terminal. Outside on the tarmac, a small group of reporters and TVs were already assembled. Flashbulbs popped incessantly. The entire scene bled live across news channels. Skywave's ominous AI system exposed. $275 million frozen, read one chyron. Billionaire's tiny son sparks aviation upheaval, read another. A cameraman spotted Ben and Chris emerging from the jet bridge. He waved a microphone. "Mr. Caldwell, can you tell us what happened up there? Why was your son slapped? And how did a single call freeze nearly $300 million in credit?" Ben paused halfway down the ramp. He exhaled a steady breath before facing the cameras. "My son was struck by a crew member without provocation," he said, voice measured. "We had reason to believe Skywave's AI cabin monitored and discriminated against certain passengers. The data we collected confirms exactly that." Behind him, Chris peeked from his father's side, still holding the VR headset. Reporters snapped questions rapidly. "Did you expect such a reaction? What's next? Will you sue?" Ben's gaze drifted over the press. He recognized a few faces from Bloomberg and CNN. He offered a tight nod and a small, composed smile. "Tonight, the evidence will be reviewed publicly. It's not just about my family. It's about anyone who boards a plane expecting to be treated fairly." A rustle spread through the nearby passengers waiting in the terminal. Some wore look-away expressions, while others leaned forward, listening. At that moment, the cabin crew from Flight 501 walked by in handcuffs. TJ, pale and bewildered. Laura Simmons openly weeping in disbelief. Cameras captured every step. The shocked murmurs of onlookers created a low hum in the background. Margaret Hill slipped from her seat toward the terminal entrance, her phone still recording. She couldn't resist whispering, "Thanks for standing up, Mr. Caldwell. That data is going to change everything." Ben dipped his head in acknowledgement. The terminal doors slid shut behind him, and he guided Chris toward a matte black SUV waiting just off the tarmac. A burly driver opened the rear door. Chris slid inside first, then Ben followed. Before the door closed, he looked back once more at the terminal, at Laura being led away by security, at the cameras still rolling. Inside the SUV, the air felt heavy, but the lighting was soft. Chris's small hand tightened around Ben's. "Dad, do you think they'll actually fix things?" he asked in a quiet voice. Ben reached across, smoothing Chris's hair. "They'll have to. Once these AI logs and videos go public, every airline will have to reconsider how they treat passengers." He paused. "We did more than expose a single incident. We exposed a pattern, an entire system that never gave some families a fair chance." Chris leaned back, exhaustion mixing with relief. "So, no more kids getting slapped on planes?" Ben offered a soft, reassuring smile. "That's the goal, buddy. For good." The SUV pulled away, heading into the wide Orlando night. Streams of terminal lights and news trucks receded in the distance. For Ben and Chris, Flight 501 was now behind them. But the ripple effect of that evening would stretch far beyond any tarmac or terminal. The data was unleashed, and the fight for fair skies was just beginning. Ben Caldwell's secure office felt colder than usual that evening, but the room was alive with the glow of multiple monitors. He leaned forward, watching as the decrypted AI cabin logs from Flight 501 automatically populated a spreadsheet. Columns of data, timestamps, sensor readings, audio transcripts filled the screen in real time. "Ready?" Amara Okafor, his head of IT, asked from beside him. She pointed to a highlighted line. "Laura Simmons and TJ conspiring to filter non-cash passengers." Ben nodded. "Pull up the cabin audio for that exact moment." Within seconds, a video player window appeared. The camera angle from Chris's VR headset showed Laura tilting her head toward TJ, voice low but unmistakable. "If he's not paying full fare, ignore his request. We focus on premium revenue." A soft hiss followed, revealing TJ's reply. "Understood. Let the AI do its job." Ben's eyes narrowed. He clicked export, and Amara began bundling the clip into a secure evidence folder. Meanwhile, another monitor displayed a raw log file. Makefile Sauchep Chin Sua, 131422, AI cabin, passenger 2A. Flagged as 131423. Prompt: prioritize person in seat 1A, 131428. Service directive: deny meal request for passenger 2A. Just below, code scrolled. Patterns emerged. They showed how Skywave's AI used facial recognition and payment type to decide service order. Passenger data was compared against a premium threshold, a proprietary algorithm buried deep in corporate servers. Amara pointed to another line. "See this? They encrypted the premium threshold as a one-way hash. We've cracked it. It's literally fair amount, $2,000. That's the cutoff." Ben exhaled. "So anyone who paid less than $2,000 gets relegated automatically." He pivoted to a different screen showing social media streams. A trending hashtag, #SkyWaveUnequal, burst with commentaries. Screenshots of Laura's audio. Fan-made infographics charting AI bias against middle-class travelers. Calls for a boycott. News outlets were already quoting a slip of that transcript. He turned back to Amara. "Package this for the press release. We'll show the world the code, the audio, and a side-by-side comparison. Premium passenger versus non-cash passenger." Amara nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Also, we traced Riverton Capital's Shell Corporation funding. They wired $3.2 million to Skywave's Innovation Fund last quarter. Coincidence? Not likely." "Include that," Ben said, leaning back. "This is bigger than one flight attendant. This is a corporate conspiracy to price segregate the skies." Across the room, a secure message pinged. It was from their legal counsel. Aggressive IEPA team wants an immediate call to discuss ATF's interest in potential civil rights violations. They're scheduling a meeting for tomorrow morning. Ben nodded again, steeling himself. He glanced at Chris's room down the hall. His son was sound asleep after a long day. This was no longer just about Chris. It was about ensuring that no traveler, no matter how they paid, would be deemed less worthy of basic respect in midair. He tapped his pen on the desk. Draft the press release. We go public at dawn. Amara gave a final click. And for a moment, both watched as the evidence crystallized on screen. Code exposing AI bias, audio revealing intent, and a financial paper trail linking Riverton Capital to Skywave's discriminatory program. Tomorrow, Ben said softly, they'll see that the sky isn't as equal as they thought. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glowed. Inside, Ben and Amara had ignited the next phase, exposing power, technology, and money colluding to keep travelers in their place. And once that truth was out, there was no turning back. Ben Caldwell's phone buzzed relentlessly before dawn. He stared at the screen. Multiple news alerts, social feeds exploding with #SkyWaveUnequal, and messages from Senior Voices, a Facebook group of retirees who'd caught wind of the scandal. He tapped a quick reply. Meeting today? All in. By breakfast, the story had gone viral. CNN's Chiron blazed. Billionaire's son slapped. Airlines AI discrimination exposed. MSNBC ran a segment featuring a panel of consumer advocates decrying the bias. Some recalled how they'd paid extra for first class only to be ignored. Even local morning shows in small towns aired clips of Laura Simmons' apology, an apology now overshadowed by the leaked audio of her instructing attendants to filter out non-cash passengers. Ben scanned comments on a live Facebook stream hosted by Margaret Hill. She'd rallied dozens of her Senior Voices friends to call for a congressional inquiry into AI ethics. It's the height of privilege, one commenter wrote. Someone must be held accountable. Midday, Ben joined a Zoom call with key lawmakers. Senator Robbins, former civil rights lawyer turned chair of the Senate Aviation Committee, started off bluntly. Mr. Caldwell, your evidence reveals systematic discrimination using AI. We're drafting legislation to regulate in-flight algorithms. Expect subpoenas. Ben nodded, expression calm. Glad to help. This goes beyond Skywave. Any airline could be using similar hidden protocols. He shared a secure link to the decrypted logs, timestamps of preferential treatment, hundreds of flagged, non-cash passengers, proof that Skywave earned an extra $12 million last quarter by upselling after AI nudged people out of loyalty programs. Meanwhile, Riverton Capital's PR team scrambled to spin the narrative. A press release landed in Ben's inbox at 2:00 p.m. Unfounded smear campaign by a vengeful tycoon, accusing him of orchestrating the leak. A second release insisted Laura Simmons was misunderstood, and TJ had no part in any malicious directives. But social media had already turned in Caldwell's favor. Users shared side-by-side infographics showing AI code snippets next to Laura's recorded voice. Retirees keyed in hashtags like #PricedOut and #ElderRespect, demanding consumer protections. Late afternoon, Ben appeared on Good Morning America for an on-camera interview. The anchor asked, "How can consumers trust an airline that grades them based on payment type?" Ben leaned forward, voice steady. "If we let corporations hide AI discrimination for profit, we're eroding basic human dignity. I want every passenger to know they're valued, regardless of how much they spend." Back at home, Chris peeked in, snacking on a peanut butter sandwich. "Dad, are people going to listen?" he asked. Ben smiled, tousling Chris's hair. "They already have, buddy. We've sparked a movement." By sunset, Skywave's CEO issued a statement, implementing full AI audit, zero tolerance for discrimination. Analysts projected Skywave's stock would drop 20% as cruise control algorithms were frozen. Meanwhile, in online senior forums, retirees compared stories of being dinged from upgrades, some for wearing the wrong color, others for not tipping enough. The collective outrage coalesced into a call for federal oversight. That evening, Ben reviewed the final social metrics. Within 24 hours, the hashtag #SkyWaveUnequal had reached 50 million views. A small victory, yes, but the bigger fight was just beginning, forcing corporations to treat all passengers with the dignity they deserved. He closed his laptop and stood by the window, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Chris curled up on the couch with a comic book. Ben reflected on how a single slap had ignited a national conversation about technology and fairness. Tomorrow, he'd testify before the Senate. Tonight, he allowed himself a moment's peace, knowing they'd shifted the conversation and prompted a generation to demand accountability. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the U.S. District Courthouse in San Francisco, casting long, narrow rectangles of light across the polished wood benches. By 9 a.m., the gallery was already filled with curious onlookers. Business professionals, senior citizens clutching printouts of the #SkyWaveUnequal expose, even a handful of tech bloggers with notepads and laptops open. In the center, behind the plaintiff's table, sat Ben Caldwell, immaculately dressed in a navy suit. He glanced to his left at Caroline Miller, his lead attorney, who was calmly reviewing notes. The tension in Ben's shoulders was palpable, but his expression remained composed, an image of controlled determination. Across the aisle, a contingent of Skywave executives huddled with their legal team. Among them were Laura Simmons, still wearing a look of haunted disbelief, and TJ, pale but silent. Their lawyers whispered urgently among themselves, aware that the evidence against them was damning. The judge, Honorable Jacqueline Rosario, entered with a soft gavel tap. She surveyed the courtroom, nodded, and took her seat at the bench. "Good morning," Judge Rosario intoned. "We are here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of Caldwell versus Skywave Airlines. Mr. Caldwell, you may proceed with your opening statement." Ben stood at a small podium to the left. His voice was clear and concise. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court, in 30 short days, my family and I were thrust into a situation most people only read about in dystopian novels. Boarded onto a plane that used artificial intelligence to decide who deserved service and who did not. My 9-year-old son, Chris, was slapped by a first-class flight attendant, Laura Simmons, for no reason other than a deeply ingrained bias baked into Skywave's AI system. We intend to prove today, with irrefutable audio and video evidence, that Skywave's technology systematically discriminated against any passenger who did not meet a premium threshold." He paused, scanning the room. "We ask the court to hold them accountable." Ben sat. Caroline stood next, unbuttoning her jacket. "Your Honor, my client will demonstrate 3 things. First, that Ms. Simmons physically assaulted a minor. Second, that the assault was part of a deliberate pattern of discrimination implemented by Skywave's AI cabin system. And third, that Skywave profited by segregating customers based on payment tiers. We have video from Mr. Caldwell's son's EcoFly VR headset, audio recordings, and decrypted AI logs that leave no room for doubt. We request immediate injunctive relief to disable the AI cabin's discriminatory functions while this case proceeds." Judge Rosario nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Miller. Ms. Simmons, you may now enter your opening statement." Laura Simmons rose, her shoulders slumped. "Your Honor, I regret the harm I've caused Chris Caldwell. However, I contend that, in the stressful environment of a first-class cabin, I believed his behavior warranted disciplinary action. I was not acting at the direction of Skywave, but rather responding to what I perceived as out-of-line conduct. The term non-cash passenger was never a formal policy. It was a shorthand some of us used among ourselves. The AI logs have been taken out of context." She gave a shaky half-smile before sitting down, as a faint murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Rosario gazed at the Skywave attorneys, then back at Ben's table. Very well. Let us begin with evidence from the plaintiff. Ms. Miller, call your first witness. Caroline Miller called Margaret Hill to the stand. The retired librarian, in her early 70s, walked forward with a measured dignity, dressed in a simple, elegant blazer. She was sworn under oath and seated. Caroline approached her. Mrs. Hill, you were present during the events on Flight 501. Please describe what you witnessed. Margaret adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. Yes, I was seated in first class, one row behind the Caldwells. I heard a commotion, what sounded like a slap, loud enough to silence the cabin. I saw Ms. Simmons hit Mr. Caldwell's young son, Chris, without any provocation. Then I watched her look triumphant, almost as if she enjoyed humiliating him in front of everyone. Caroline nodded. And did you see anything suggesting that this behavior was encouraged or condoned by Skywave's policies? Margaret leaned forward. Later, I was on my phone, monitoring the private Skywave IVR feed, and I saw transcripts that indicated Ms. Simmons and her coworker had been told to filter non-cash passengers and let the AI decide who got service. I heard them say, if they don't pay full fare, pretend the meal option is sold out. It wasn't a shock. They were brazen enough to discuss it right in the open. On the large projection screen, Caroline clicked a remote, and the courtroom's monitors flashed lines of decrypted text. Makefile Sao Chep Chin, Sua, 12-14-22, AI cabin, passenger. Caldwell, seat 2A, flagged as 12-14-23. Service directive, deny meal request for 2A. Prioritize 1A, 12-15-05. Laura Simmons, audio. Ignore his request, he's not worth it. A collective gasp rippled across the gallery. Caroline turned back to Margaret. Thank you, Mrs. Hill. No further questions. Next, Skywave's attorney, Mark Dayton, approached to cross-examine. He gave Margaret a sympathetic look. Mrs. Hill, are you certain you heard non-cash passenger? Could you have misheard? Margaret shook her head firmly. No, I was listening on my phone's live feed. The clarity was undeniable. Mark frowned but nodded, stepping back to his table. Caroline called her next witness, Dr. Isabel Chen, the AI ethics researcher Ben had retained. Dr. Chen took the stand and was sworn in. Caroline gestured to a large printout of code segments. Dr. Chen, please explain how the AI cabin system functioned. Dr. Chen adjusted her glasses and leaned over the printout. Skywave's AI cabin algorithm used payment metadata, among other factors, to assign service priorities. If a passenger's ticket cost less than $2,000, what the system deemed a premium threshold, the AI flagged them as lower priority. The effect was self-reinforcing. Attendants were instructed by the AI interface to bypass requests for any flagged passenger. She pointed to the lines. Here, the encrypted function is premium passenger ID. Returns true only if fare paid, $2,000. That's the literal cutoff. Passengers below that threshold experienced systematically delayed or denied service. This is not an incidental bug. It's an intentional design to maximize revenue. Caroline nodded, then asked, in your expert opinion, did Skywave's board of directors know about this? Dr. Chen squared her shoulders. Absolutely. The algorithm was greenlit by the Innovation Committee, a group that included Skywave's CEO and CFO. It was a corporate initiative underwritten by Riverton Capital's investment. Another murmur filled the room as Caroline sat. Judge Rosario tapped her hammer lightly. Very well. The defense may cross-examine. Skywave's lawyer rose. Dr. Chen, have you personally seen any communications, emails, memos, directly from top executives acknowledging this policy? Dr. Chen nodded. Yes, I have subpoenas showing email chains between Skywave's CTO and senior leadership approving the premium threshold logic. I can provide those to the court. Objection! Skywave's counsel protested. but Judge Rosario overruled. Let the record reflect that Dr. Chen will supply those documents. After a brief recess, the court reconvened. Caroline presented the final piece, the 360-degree video from Chris's VR headset. The lights dimmed, and the recording played. In grainy but unmistakable detail, the courtroom saw the slap, Laura's smug glance, and her whispered directive to TJ. It's all clear. The evidence came straight from a 9-year-old's perspective. When the video ended, the judge removed her glasses. This court is troubled by the clear evidence of physical assault and the integration of discriminatory AI protocols. I am inclined to issue a preliminary injunction to disable the contentious elements of Skywave's AI cabin system. Skywave's lead attorney rose, voice tight. Your Honor, our client expects to contest these allegations fully, but we ask for a stay on that injunction to allow continued service while we appeal. Judge Rosario leaned forward. Given the compelling nature of the evidence, I find irreparable harm likely if these discriminatory functions remain active. The preliminary injunction is granted. Skywave must revert to a neutral service algorithm. No passenger can be denied service based on payment amount until further order of this court. A hush fell. Caroline Miller exhaled, punching Ben's knee under the table. He offered a quick, relieved smile. Judge Rosario addressed the courtroom. We will reconvene in 2 weeks for further arguments. Court is adjourned. She tapped the gavel. As the gallery emptied, reporters surged forward with cameras and mics. Ben and Caroline exchanged a brief look. Victory, yes, but tempered by the knowledge that the real battle lay ahead. Laura Simmons sat with her head in her hands, and TJ avoided eye contact with anyone. Outside, Margaret Hill awaited Ben. Mr. Caldwell, she said softly, embracing him. You did it. Ben gave a tired nod. We did it, Mrs. Hill, but we're not done yet. News of the Senate hearing barely had time to settle before a different storm hit Ben Caldwell's world. A massive cyber attack aimed at wiping out every bit of evidence he and his team had painstakingly collected. At first, the attack looked like a routine DDoS barrage, but it quickly escalated. Multiple servers housing encrypted AI cabin logs, VR footage, and financial trails began experiencing suspicious data wipe attempts. Code that skimmed through files, looking for anything with Skywave or AI discrim in the metadata. Ben was in his secure basement office when alarms started blaring. 3 large monitors flashed urgent warnings. Unauthorized access detected. Server cluster alpha. Mirroring discrepancy. Shadow protocol engaged. And finally, data integrity threat. Attempting ransomware deployment. He rose from his desk, heart pounding. His CTO, Amara Okafor, elbowed past a row of network terminals. They're bypassing our standard firewalls, she reported, fingers flying over the keyboard. They've got government-grade tools, rootkits, zero-day exploits. This isn't just corporate espionage. It's a full-blown, multi-vector attack. Ben quietly activated Shadow Protocol, the off-grid data vault system he and Amara had developed after a minor hack attempt 2 years prior. Servers stored encrypted copies of all critical evidence on physically isolated drives, tucked behind layers of quantum-grade encryption. The on-screen notification changed to Isolated Backup Activated, syncing data to secure nodes. Within seconds, encrypted copies of the AI cabin logs, the VR footage from Chris's headset, financial transaction records, and Senate hearing documents began transferring to those isolated vaults, servers that were completely offline, unreachable by any network. Meanwhile, Amara rerouted traffic to disposable honeypot servers, feeding the attackers false data, mock logs, dummy transcripts, even fabricated AI code snippets that led nowhere. Ben's phone buzzed. It was Agent Karen Liu from the FBI's Cybercrime Division. Mr. Caldwell, we've been tracking this breach. Riverton's shell servers in Frankfurt and Singapore are the entry points. We're initiating warrants for seizure of their hosting providers. Ben exhaled. Good. Let's cut them off. Already in motion, Liu confirmed. But expect multiple fallback channels. This could get ugly. Suddenly, a large terminal screen lit up. Data wipe progress, 15%. Red bars crawled across the screen, indicating that the attackers had already destroyed a portion of the non-shadowed data stores, server clusters that hadn't completed replication to the isolated vaults. Amara's eyes narrowed. I'm spinning up additional offline nodes. We'll keep the vitals intact. Their attack signature matches tools only accessible to a well-funded entity. Definitely Riverton or their tech subsidiary, Pinnacle Digital. Ben nodded, adrenaline surging. Keep working. Notify me the second it's safe to switch to lawsuits and subpoenas. She tapped a few more keys, gasping as new, malicious process detected alerts popped up. But by now, 87% of their critical data was tucked away in the offline vaults, completely untouchable. The on-screen message morphed to Shadow Protocol, 87% complete, finalizing offline backup. He sank into his chair, running a hand over his face. They're desperate. Behind him, the basement door clicked open. Chris peeked in, eyes wide. Dad, is everything okay? Ben turned, forcing a calm smile. We're fine, buddy. Just some grown-up stuff to handle. Chris nodded and left, gentle footsteps echoing up the stairs. Ben returned to the monitors. Amara, status? Shadow Protocol at 100%, she announced. Nothing else is at risk. We've trapped all the data in offline vaults. Ben pressed his fingertips together. Good. Call the FBI. Get them everything they need to shut Riverton down. Within an hour, FBI agents executed warrants in Holland and Singapore, seizing servers and impounding digital evidence of sabotage. In the Caldwell Command Center, rooted behind concrete walls, Ben and Amara high-fived silently, knowing they'd just outmaneuvered a major attack. Later that night, as Manhattan's skyline shimmered through his office windows, Ben reflected on how close they'd come to losing everything. Every AI log, every VR clip, every shred of proof. They thought they could bury us with Russian-style malware, he murmured to Amara. But they underestimated our preparations. Amara nodded. Shadow Protocol saved us. Ben closed his laptop. Tomorrow, they'd work with the FBI to press criminal charges and expose Pinnacle Digital's role in the attacks. The PR would be brutal, but they had the upper hand because the evidence was safe and the world would see the full story unfiltered. He tapped his phone one last time. Dawn press release. AI sabotage exposed. Riverton's digital fingerprints confirmed. Senate to convene emergency oversight hearing. With that, he flipped off the light. The silent hum of the backup generators was all that remained. Their digital fortress had held. The courtroom that morning felt electric, as if every chair crackled with anticipation. Word had spread that Skywave executives and Riverton Capital operatives would face dire consequences today. At the defense table, Laura Simmons sat alone, shoulders slumped, her uniform discarded. She wore a plain suit, hair pulled back loosely, guilt etched into her palms. Across the aisle, James Whitfield, the high-priced attorney, paced nervously, reviewing notes that incriminated both Skywave and Pinnacle's parent company. Ben Caldwell sat with his lead counsel, Caroline Miller, in seats reserved for plaintiffs. Next to them, Captain Marcus Rivera, Skywave's former interim CEO, looked gaunt. He'd resigned under pressure last week when internal emails confirmed his active role in approving the discriminatory AI system. On the prosecution side, Agent Karen Liu of the FBI and two federal prosecutors exchanged quiet nods. Judge Rosario entered, settling behind the bench. Good morning. We reconvene for the continuation of Caldwell versus Skywave. We have new evidence from the FBI's investigation into Pinnacle Digital's cyber attack and the conspiracy orchestrated by Riverton Capital. We'll begin with the government's presentation. Agent Liu stepped up, producing a stack of files. Your Honor, after Skywave's AI logs were disclosed, our cyber team traced an organized sabotage campaign back to a Riverton subsidiary, Pinnacle Digital. We recovered server logs showing automated scripts deployed to corrupt Caldwell's evidence servers. We also intercepted emails between Mr. Whitfield and Ms. Simmons, confirming they actively manipulated AI parameters to target non-cash passengers. A large screen flickered on, displaying highlighted email chains dated months before Flight 501's incident. In one, Laura Simmons typed, "We need to make an example of the Caldwells. Maintain the AI code that downgrades anyone under a $2,000 fare." Below was Whitfield's response. "Understood. We'll ensure Skywave keeps that threshold hidden. Publicly, it's just a recommendation algorithm." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Laura's head snapped up, eyes wide. Caroline Miller approached. "Your Honor, we move to introduce these emails as evidence of a coordinated conspiracy to discriminate and sabotage Caldwell's data." The judge nodded, and the emails were marked as evidence. Next, the prosecution called Michael Pierce, the lead co-attendant. He appeared nervous but resolute. Under oath, he admitted that he'd participated in late-night calls with Laura and TJ, receiving directives from Whitfield to prioritize high rollers. He confessed that Pinnacle had offered him and Laura substantial hush money, checks deposited into offshore accounts. Lightning flashed through the courtroom when Prosecutor Daniels presented a forgery analysis. The signed checks from Pinnacle Digital to Ms. Simmons and Mr. Pierce were traced to shell corporations controlled by the Davenport family, key stakeholders in Pinnacle and Riverton. We have bank records, KYC documents, travel logs, enough to tie them directly to the cyber attacks that nearly erased Caldwell's evidence. At 30 minutes into the presentation, Judge Rosario leaned forward. "Ms. Simmons, Mr. Whitfield, Mr. Pierce, you are hereby indicted on charges of conspiracy, civil rights violations, and cybercrime. Bail is revoked. You will be remanded to federal custody pending trial." Laura's face went pale. Whitfield exchanged a horrified glance with his remaining defense staff. Pierce dropped his head, comforted by a lawyer's hand on his shoulder. Ben and Caroline rose as the judge continued. "Skywave Airlines, as a corporate entity, will face additional hearings to determine fines and reparations for systematic discrimination and obstruction of justice. The court finds probable cause that Skywave executives willfully ignored repeated discrimination complaints. A separate hearing will schedule civil penalties." Outside the courtroom, news crews clamored to catch every soundbite. Ben emerged, flanked by Caroline and Agent Liu. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Caldwell, did you expect such sweeping indictments?" Ben's response was calm, measured. "Justice must be thorough. Today proves that no corporation, no matter how large, can hide discrimination or sabotage behind algorithms." As he exited, Chris watched from behind a velvet rope. His father ruffled his hair. "We did it, champ. The fight's not over, but today was huge." In the distance, Guardian drones whirred overhead, broadcasting the story live. Visible proof that technology could both hide injustice and, when exposed, hold power to account. Ben Caldwell stepped into the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Skywave Airlines, the same space where, months earlier, he'd sat as a plaintiff challenging the company's AI discrimination. Now, he stood on the other side of the table. The interim executive team, handpicked after the upheaval, looked up, a mixture of anticipation and relief on their faces. At the head of the table, Diane Morales, CEO by appointment, offered a respectful nod. She wore a simple navy suit and held a printed copy of Ben's blueprint, Flight Justice Protocols. To her right sat Marcus Rivera, no longer captain or CEO, but head of customer experience. Across from them, a diverse group of newly appointed directors, technology, human resources, diversity, and inclusion, waited for Ben's opening remarks. Ben cleared his throat and began. "I didn't come here to punish Skywave. I came because we, collectively, have an opportunity to change how an airline treats people. I've acquired controlling interest to ensure these changes stick." He spread out a set of documents labeled Anti-Discrimination AI Audit, a commitment to open source the cabin algorithm so any user, Regulator or passenger can verify there's no payment tier bias. Diverse leadership mandate. At least 50% of all shuttle and first-class managers must come from underrepresented backgrounds. Transparent reporting mechanisms. Monthly equity scorecards published publicly, detailing any complaints and how they were resolved. Diane scanned the first page. We're honestly excited to implement this, Ben. Our teams are ready. Ben nodded. Today, we start dismantling the old culture. Passengers will see crew training videos that include role-playing empathy scenarios, especially for families with children. In addition, we'll launch the Young Traveler's Voice Initiative, an in-flight app that allows children to report mistreatment directly, anonymously if they prefer. He paused, letting that sink in. CEO circles in DC are already calling this groundbreaking. Just then, the door opened. Margaret Hill, the retired librarian who'd first spoken up on Flight 501, stepped into the room. At 73, her presence was both modest and magnetic. She carried a copy of Ben's new Passenger Bill of Rights. Diane rose to greet her. Margaret approached the table. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, for giving us a voice. I volunteered to be on the Passenger Advisory Board. I want to ensure this isn't just another program that fades away. Her eyes swept across the new directors. I want kids to grow up seeing airlines hold themselves to a higher standard. Ben smiled. Margaret, your advocacy changed everything. We'd be nowhere without people like you. He turned back to the board. Now, let's talk timeline. By next week, all in-flight systems will remove any AI filters tied to fare amount. By the end of the month, new training begins. Our first batch of Young Traveler's Voice betas will be installed on 10 aircraft. We'll monitor feedback and expand accordingly. Expand. Marcus raised a hand. We also have a new grant program, Homes for Seniors. Caldwell has committed $50 million to build housing for retired Skywave staff who faced layoffs during the scandal. A ripple of appreciation passed around the table. Thank you, Ben said, voice warm. It's about more than optics. It's about community, making sure no one feels abandoned. As the meeting closed, Diane and Marcus exchanged determined looks. The boardroom, once a battleground of lawsuits and hostile emails, now buzzed with collaboration. Ben watched Margaret walk out, clutching the Passenger Bill of Rights. He caught her eye and gave a small wave. Outside, a new Skywave jet taxied past, its livery subtly updated with the tagline, "Everyone belongs in the sky." Ben turned back inside, the weight of responsibility tempered by genuine hope. They'd transformed a scandal into a catalyst for change. Now, it was up to them to see it through. Skywave's transformation was most visible on the tarmac at San Francisco International, where a newly painted fleet of gleaming blue and white jets lined up under an early morning sun. A year had passed since that fateful slap, and today was the official launch of the Young Traveler's Voice Initiative, an in-flight system that allowed children to report mistreatment directly to a neutral oversight team. Children on this flight wore small clip-on devices that could record audio snippets whenever they felt uneasy, sending real-time alerts to both cabin crew and an on-ground monitoring center. In Seat 2C, 9-year-old Chris Caldwell fiddled with his new device, a tiny microphone badge on his lapel. He glanced across the aisle at his younger sister, Zara, 13, who was already toggling through passenger equity scorecards on her tablet, an interactive dashboard that showed in real time whether the airline was meeting its new transparency benchmarks. Zara tapped a chart labeled "Complaints Resolved Within 2 Hours, 98%, and gave her father a thumbs up. Ben Caldwell watched from row 1, wearing a pressed white shirt with the tailor's crease still sharp. Beside him, Margaret Hill, 73, smiled as she observed a young boy raise his device when a flight attendant took a bit too long bringing juice. Within seconds, the cabin crew received an alert. A junior flight attendant knelt beside the boy's seat, offering a sincere apology and a fresh glass. The boy beamed, and Margaret's eyes glistened. "That's exactly why this matters," she whispered. Mid-cabin, Diane Morales, now Chief Customer Officer, monitored an iPad. Every alert, every resolution streamed across her screen. A green, resolved icon flashed as the system quietly logged the interaction. She tapped her communications pod. All systems look good. 99% compliance today. Across the aisle, the former Captain Marcus Rivera nodded, gratified that "everyone belongs truly" was no longer just a tagline. In the rear, a crew of diverse flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle. They wore badges identifying pronouns and hometowns, an outward sign of the inclusive culture VMware, formerly Skywave, had built. One of them offered Zara a vegetarian snack without being asked. The AI no longer flagged passengers based on spend. When the flight touched down in Los Angeles, Ben stood in the front door as the final passengers disembarked. He watched families with kids, seniors, and solo travelers, all treated with equal courtesy. Zara bounded up, pulling her father's arm. "Dad, did you see how Mia got her juice so fast?" she asked about a little girl across the aisle. Ben crouched down, ruffling Zara's hair. "That's change in action, kiddo. And next up, homes for seniors. Today, we break ground on 50 new units outside Oakland, dedicated to retired flight attendants and community members in need." Margaret Hill was right behind them, carrying a bouquet of daisies for the groundbreaking ceremony. Pulling out his phone, Ben snapped a photo of the plaque next to him. "In honor of those who spoke up, Skywave's beacon of equity." He sent it to the Washington Accountability Project's group chat, where colleagues were already sharing updates from healthcare and education reform projects funded by his foundation. As the sun dipped low, a Skywave jet ascended overhead, its engines a gentle roar against the dusky sky. Inside his car, Chris gazed out the window, holding his young traveler's voice device. "Dad, next time, can I be the one to report a problem?" he asked, eyes bright. Ben smiled and squeezed his son's shoulder. "Of course, champ. And one day, Zara will represent the next generation of activists, just like she's doing now." He glanced at Zara, who was already drafting a new report on AI ethics for her school project. In that moment, Ben realized the real victory. It wasn't just about punishing a few bad apples or disabling a biased algorithm. It was about building a system where anyone, child, senior, or middle-class family, could speak up and be heard. As the city lights mirrored the sky's deepening blue, he felt a rare, full-bodied hope. They had not only changed an airline, they had nudged the entire industry, and perhaps the culture, toward true equity.